Outside the community center, the night had settled into a hush. Streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalk as Lyanna stepped out, the buzz of conversation still echoing faintly behind her. Her coat caught the wind, and she wrapped it tighter, around herself, drawing in a breath that tasted like city smoke and cold air, and something else. Hope, maybe, in its rawest form. Her phone buzzed. Text message. Aldrich. Heard you lit up the room tonight. Peter says the crowd cheered. Send me the footage if someone caught it. Another pause. Then, you made them feel seen. That matters more than anything else today. Lyanna's fingers hovered over the screen, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth despite the exhaustion. She typed, "It wasn't just me. It was Ridgeview. It was all of them. I just gave it shape. P.S. You owe me coffee. You bailed on the late shift." A few seconds passed. Then Aldrich. Fair, tomorrow morning, before the next wave of political whack-a-mole. She slid her phone into her bag, heart quiet but steady, and turned toward the subway station. The next morning, the cafe near the headquarters was still half asleep when Aldrich arrived. He carried 2 coffees and a paper bag with what the barista swore were the best scones in the district. He took the corner booth by the window, the same one they'd sat in weeks ago when Ridgeview had still just been a bullet point on a briefing sheet. Minutes later, Lyanna stepped in, hair slightly damp from the drizzle, eyes already scanning the room. When she spotted him, something in her posture softened. "You're early," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "I owed you," he replied, pushing the coffee toward her. She took a sip, then closed her eyes briefly. "God, yes. That's magic." He chuckled softly. "Still think the board won't listen?" She shrugged. "They'll listen. I'm just not sure they'll hear." A beat of quiet. Then Aldrich leaned forward slightly. "Then we make them. We build so loud they can't ignore it," she nodded, eyes meeting his. "We build together." "Together," he echoed. And this time, it wasn't strategy. It was a vow. Weeks passed. Late nights bled into early mornings. Drafts were rewritten. Community voices were recorded, transcribed, woven into presentation decks. Policies became stories, stories became momentum, and through it all, Lyanna and he. Aldrich moved in quiet lockstep. Sometimes she'd leave post-it notes on his desk, quotes from Ridgeview residents or sharp reminders of deadlines. Sometimes he'd leave coffee by her keyboard without a word. Their rhythm was never declared, but it was unshakable. Until one evening, long after most of the office lights had gone dark, Aldrich stood on the headquarters rooftop again, the same rooftop where Lyanna had once left her resignation letter in his hands. She stepped out behind him, her silhouette framed by the glass door's glow. "You're brooding," she said. "I'm reflecting," he replied, a faint smirk playing at his lips. "We're days away from the vote. Ridgeview might actually pass." She came to stand beside him, wind tugging strands of her hair free. "That's not just policy, that's impact." He looked at her then, fully, unflinchingly. "You changed the way I see things, not just in boardrooms, everywhere." Her breath caught, not in surprise, but in recognition. "And you reminded me that power doesn't always corrupt. Sometimes it rebuilds." The silence between them brimmed, full not of hesitation, but decision. He reached for her hand. She let him, fingers laced, the city stretched below, noisy, imperfect, alive. But on that rooftop they were still. 2 people not yet at the end of the fight, but no longer fighting alone. The morning of the vote arrived beneath a low gray sky. Rain tapped softly against the windows of the board chamber, a sound too delicate for the tension gathering inside. Aldrich sat at the long table, flanked by department heads and external observers. Lyanna sat to his right, fingers poised but not fidgeting. In front of them lay the final Ridgeview proposal, a document now weeks in the making, annotated by community leaders, economists, and policy analysts alike. It bore the marks of sleepless nights and relentless effort. Parov opened the session with procedural notes, his voice impassive as ever. But Aldrich felt the shift, the weight of everything they'd pushed forward, pressing down like the pause before a storm. One by one, voices rose across the table, some affirming, some skeptical, one or two openly resistant, and then it was Lyanna's turn to speak. She didn't look at the proposal in front of her. Instead, she looked around the room. "I've heard a lot about feasibility this morning," she began. "About risk and budgets, about optics. But the core of Ridgeview isn't just a program. It's a recognition that our job isn't to fix people, it's to stop pretending they're broken in the first place." A silence followed, not tense, but still. "They don't need our pity. They need our partnership." She sat down slowly. Aldrich didn't look at her. He didn't need to. The energy in the room had shifted, a ripple, quiet but spreading. When the vote came, it wasn't unanimous, but it passed, and in that moment no one cheered, no one clapped, but Aldrich turned to Lyanna, and the look between them said everything. "We did it, on our terms." That evening, the headquarters was oddly quiet. Most of the staff had gone out, drinks, celebrations, decompressing. Aldrich stayed behind, walking the corridors like he needed to memorize them anew. The building didn't feel different, but he did. In the executive lounge, he found Lyanna by the window, sipping tea and staring down at the city. He stepped in. She didn't turn, just said, "You ever think about how much energy we spend just trying to be heard?" He approached, slowly. "More than we admit." Silence. Then, "I thought I'd feel relief when it passed, but all I feel is, what comes next?" Aldrich came to stand beside her. "That's the mark of someone who builds," he said. "The rest celebrate. We get ready," she exhaled, letting her shoulder lean just slightly into his. The contact was subtle, natural, like a tide meeting the shore. "And yet," she murmured, "part of me doesn't want to move right away. Just breathe this in. Remember how this feels." "You should," he said softly. "You earned it." They stood like that for a while, city lights flickering beneath them. No rush, no next step, just presence. Then Lyanna looked up at him, her expression unreadable and raw. "What happens when the work stops being the only thing holding us together?" Aldrich's breath caught. Then, simply, he replied, "Then maybe we learn what's holding us beyond that." And in that quiet space, there was no strategy, no agenda, just something real, unspoken, but no longer hidden. The weekend arrived like a slow breath, offering a fragile pause from the relentless pace of their lives. Aldrich found himself dialing Lyanna's number, just as the afternoon sun dipped, low, casting long shadows through the office windows. She picked up after a brief ring, her voice warm but tinged with exhaustion. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," he replied, a smile curling his lips despite the fatigue threading his words. "Thought maybe we could step outside this week. Take a walk somewhere quiet. No reports, no meetings, just a break." There was a pause on the line, the kind that held more meaning than words. "I'd like that," she said finally. They agreed to meet at the Riverfront Park, a place neither had visited in years. The city's pulse softened there, the hum of traffic replaced by the gentle lap of water and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Aldrich arrived early, the air cool, but forgiving. He leaned against the railing overlooking the river, letting the silence settle around him. When Lyanna appeared, Her presence felt like the first light after a long night. They walked side by side, the space between them easy and unforced. "You were right," Aldrich said after a while, eyes tracing the water's slow dance. "Change isn't sudden. It's the small moments, the quiet commitments." Lyanna nodded. "And the people who refuse to look away." Their conversation drifted from work to memories, childhood dreams, unexpected failures, the small victories that often went unnoticed. With each word, the walls they'd built around their hearts softened, revealing fragments of vulnerability beneath. At a bench near the water's edge, they paused. Lyanna's gaze met Aldrich's, steady and searching. "I've been holding back," she admitted, afraid that letting myself hope would only lead to disappointment. Aldrich reached out, his hand brushing hers. A simple touch charged with unspoken understanding. "We don't have to face it alone anymore," he said quietly. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." For a moment, the world shrank to just the two of them. The river's gentle murmur, the fading light, and the promise held in that quiet connection. The days that followed carried a new rhythm, quieter, yet charged with a subtle undercurrent of hope. At work, Aldrich found himself reaching for Lyanna's insights more often, their conversations moving beyond data and policy into the realm of shared conviction. The Ridgeview proposal became more than just a project. It was their collective heartbeat. One evening, as twilight softened the skyline, Aldrich lingered at his desk long after most had left. The glow of his laptop illuminated the thoughtful crease between his brows. He reread Lyanna's latest edits, her notes weaving humanity into every line. His phone buzzed gently, her name lighting up the screen. He answered before the second ring. "Still here?" her voice asked, laced with tired warmth. "Trying to make sense of all this," he admitted. "Me too," she replied. "But maybe we're not supposed to make sense of it all right away." The words settled between them like a fragile truce with uncertainty. "We'll find the way," Aldrich said, his tone firmer. Lyanna smiled through the speaker. Together. That promise echoed in the quiet hum of the office, a small beacon in the vast cityscape beyond. Aldrich closed his eyes for a moment, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. The steady weight of Lyanna's belief in their work anchored him amid the storm of deadlines and doubts. He opened his laptop again, fingers hovering over the keys, then started typing a new email, clear, concise, and laced with the quiet determination they shared. Outside, the city's pulse slowed as night deepened, but inside that small office, the promise of change flickered unwavering. He glanced once more at the Open Ridge View file, tracing the margin where Lyanna's words lingered. Change happens when people see each other. And for the first time in a long while, Aldrich believed they might be seen, and might see each other enough to make it count. Aldrich's fingers moved deliberately across the keyboard, reshaping the proposal with a renewed focus that blended data with the human stories Lyanna had emphasized. Each paragraph reflected their shared conviction, a quiet but persistent force threading through the formal language and statistics. Outside, the city's lights flickered like distant stars caught between dusk and dawn, mirroring the fragile hope that glimmered within the words on his screen. He paused, eyes drifting to the photo tucked inside the Ridgeview file. A candid shot of a mother and child from the community, their faces framed by both hardship and resilience. The image stirred something deeper than professional obligation. It was a reminder of why the fight mattered beyond the boardroom battles and political maneuvering. A soft ping from his phone broke the quiet. A message from Peter. "Ready when you are. Let me know if you want a fresh set of eyes on the draft." Aldrich smiled faintly, fingers tapping a quick response. The night stretched on around him, still and steady, filled with the invisible hum of progress inching forward. Somewhere nearby, Lyanna's voice would soon fill a room, carrying the weight of their vision into the ears that needed to hear it most. With a final keystroke, Aldrich saved the document, leaned back, and let the quiet certainty settle. Change, he realized, was no longer a distant hope, but the careful unfolding of shared determination. Aldrich closed his laptop and rubbed his temples, exhaustion pressing against the edges of his resolve. The hum of the city outside seemed to seep through the thin walls, a constant reminder that life was moving on, with or without their efforts. But tonight felt different. The weight on his shoulders, though still heavy, had softened just enough to let a fragile hope take root. His mind replayed Lyanna's words, the determination in her eyes, the way she made Daita feel alive, urgent, personal. It was a quiet kind of revolution, born from the stories of people who refused to be invisible. As dawn's first light crept through the window, Aldrich felt the shift within himself, a subtle turning point where duty met conviction, and the path forward, though steep, seemed possible to climb. The soft buzz of the office lights flickered on as the first few team members trickled in. Aldrich stood by the window, watching the city slowly awaken beneath the pale morning sky. His phone buzzed again, a message from Lyanna. "Ready when you are. Let's make today count." He tapped. "Out a quick reply. Together." He turned, eyes landing on the stack of community testimonials waiting on his desk. Faces and voices that would no longer be ignored. The quiet hum of determination settled deep inside him, steadying the storm of doubts. Today wasn't just another day of work. It was the beginning of something real. And as the elevator chimed softly, he knew the fight ahead was worth every quiet, unspoken promise they'd made under the city's restless sky. The office grew, brighter as the sun rose higher, casting long shafts of light across desks cluttered with papers and glowing screens. Aldrich moved to his workspace, setting the Ridge View folder carefully before him. Around him, the soft murmur of colleagues preparing for the day's battles filled the air. Lyanna arrived moments later, her presence steady and calm, despite the fatigue lingering beneath her sharp gaze. She slid into the chair beside him, the click of her laptop opening punctuating the quiet. "We'll need to revise the budget projections again," she said, scrolling through spreadsheets with practiced ease. "If we can highlight the direct impact on local schools and healthcare, it might sway the board." Aldrich nodded, fingers tapping thoughtfully on the desk. "And those testimonials, let's prioritize voices that reflect the diversity of the community. We need their stories to resonate." She glanced up, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Exactly. Numbers alone won't move hearts." They worked side by side, a silent partnership forged in purpose and quiet resilience. Outside, the city thrummed with life, indifferent to the small victories and setbacks playing out behind. Glass walls, but inside change was stirring. One step at a time, one story after another. Together they'd make sure the city's heartbeat was heard. The morning deepened, and the office buzzed with renewed energy as more team members filtered in. Aldrich and Lyanna remained focused, their work weaving data with humanity, strategy, with empathy. Every word in the proposal became sharper, every number more grounded in the realities they sought to change. Aldrich's phone buzzed again. This time, a calendar reminder for a mid-morning meeting with the board. He took a deep breath, straightened his posture, and glanced at Lyanna. Her eyes met his, steady and determined. "Ready?" she asked softly. He nodded, more than ever. Together they rose and stepped into the corridor where the morning light pooled like liquid gold. The day ahead was long and uncertain, But in that moment they shared a quiet certainty. They were no longer fighting alone. The conference room was colder than Aldrich expected, the sharp edges of the long table mirroring the tension that filled the space. Board members settled into their seats with practiced coolness, eyes flickering between their devices and the door as Aldrich and Lyanna entered. Aldrich took a deep breath, the weight of their hopes pressing on his chest. Lyanna's steady presence beside him was a silent anchor. He opened the folder, sliding the proposal across the table like a quiet declaration. The room fell silent as Lyanna began. Her voice was calm, but carried an undercurrent of urgency. A clear call beyond the data, a demand to see the faces behind the numbers. Questions came fast, sharp as knives. What guarantees do we have? How will this affect the bottom line? Is this politically viable? Aldrich met each challenge with measured responses, drawing on the community voices Lyanna had painstakingly collected. The stories were their strongest weapon, raw, real, impossible to ignore. Minutes stretched, tension thickened. But slowly, nods replaced furrowed brows. Eyes that had been skeptical softened. The shift was subtle but undeniable. As the meeting adjourned, a quiet murmur of reluctant approval rippled through the room. Outside, Aldrich exhaled deeply. Lyanna smiled, exhaustion and triumph mingling in her gaze. "We did it," she whispered. "For now," he replied. "But this is just the first step." Together they stepped into the hallway, two warriors bound by purpose, ready to face whatever came next. The elevator dinged softly as Aldrich and Lyanna rode down, the silence between them thick but not uncomfortable. Outside, the city was settling into evening, lights flickering on, the hum of life continuing unabated. Lyanna broke the quiet first, voice low but steady. "Board's reaction, it wasn't what I expected." Aldrich glanced at her, tired but resolute. "Neither was the fight we signed up for." She nodded, fingers tightening around her coffee cup. "We're making progress, just not fast enough." He looked out the window at the cityscape, a blur of amber and steel. Change never is, but tonight, I feel it, that momentum, that thread of hope. Lyanna's smile was small but real. "Then we hold on to that, whatever it takes." The elevator doors opened, spilling them into the bustling lobby. People hurried by, absorbed in their own battles. Aldrich and Lyanna moved through them, connected now not just by work but by something deeper, a shared mission, a quiet understanding that they were no longer alone in this fight. Outside, the night wrapped around the city like a blanket. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Aldrich felt ready. Together they stepped into the night, ready to face whatever dawn awaited. The city breathed around them, cool air carrying faint sounds of distant traffic, the murmur of late-night conversations, footsteps echoing off the pavement. Aldrich and Lyanna walked side by side, their steps unhurried, the weight of the day settling into a shared quiet. Lyanna glanced up at the stars just beginning to pierce the dusk. "Sometimes I forget the city sleeps at all." Aldrich smiled softly. "It doesn't, not really. It just changes shape, like us." She looked at him, eyes reflecting a mix of exhaustion and determination. "We're not the same people who started this, are we?" "No," he said firmly. "We're stronger, more certain." They reached the corner where their paths would diverge. Lyanna toward the charity event, Aldrich back to the office for the long night ahead. "See you tomorrow?" she asked. He nodded, the promise carrying weight beyond the words. "Tomorrow." As she turned away, Aldrich stayed for a moment, watching the glow of the city around her, the pulse of lives intertwined with theirs, all moving forward, step by deliberate step. He inhaled deeply, the night cool and steady. Then he turned, heading back into the urban rhythm, ready to carry the momentum forward. The next morning, light filtered through the blinds, casting soft stripes across Aldrich's office. The city outside stirred awake, but inside, a quiet calm lingered, like the pause between a deep breath and the moment you let it out. Aldrich sat at his desk, the Ridge View file open beside his laptop. He tapped a few keys, drafting an email to the team, then paused. His phone buzzed, a message from Lyanna. Early morning crunch? Coffee at the usual spot after the meeting? He smiled, fingers flying over the keyboard to reply. Wouldn't miss it. Minutes later, the door creaked open and Lyanna slipped inside, eyes bright despite the early hour. The tension from yesterday had softened into a steady resolve. They exchanged a brief smile and dove into the day's agenda, a dance of strategy, community voices, and hard data. Each word, each glance, built the foundation for something bigger than either alone. Outside, the city awoke fully now, alive with possibility, the rhythm of change steady and sure. And for the first time in a long while, Aldrich felt like they were moving not just toward progress, but toward something truly lasting. Aldrich and Lyanna moved through the day side by side, their steps in sync as the office buzzed around them. The team gathered in the conference room again, this time with fresh testimonials and revised proposals laid out like armor against skepticism. Lyanna spoke with quiet authority, weaving the community's stories into the hard numbers. Aldrich supported her seamlessly, answering questions and deflecting doubts with steady confidence. The room, once thick with tension, now crackled with cautious hope. After the meeting, Aldrich leaned back, exhaling deeply. Lyanna's hand brushed his arm, an unspoken thank you, and he nodded, the weight between them lighter now, tempered by shared purpose. As evening fell, the city lights flickered on one by one, like sparks ready to ignite. They packed up, heading out together into the cooling air, knowing tomorrow would bring more battles, but also more moments like this. Quiet victories carved out in the relentless pulse of progress. They stepped out into the evening air, the city's pulse softer now, shadows lengthening with the fading light. Aldrich inhaled deeply, the crispness clearing the remnants of the day's pressure from his mind. Lyanna glanced at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. We're making a difference, she said quietly, as if affirming it to herself. He nodded, eyes scanning the streets where streetlights flickered on, casting golden pools of warmth against the cool pavement. Slowly, but we are. They walked side by side, their steps falling into an easy rhythm. The hum of distant traffic blended with the murmur of conversations drifting from open cafe doors. It was a moment of stillness amid the chaos, a shared breath before the next storm. Stopping at a crosswalk, Aldrich caught Lyanna's eye again. There was something unspoken there, a promise, a tether holding them steady. As the light changed, they crossed together into the night, moving forward, uncertain but unyielding, toward whatever came next. The night wrapped around them like a quiet companion as they made their way to the small park nearby. The city's noise softened, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the occasional distant bark of a dog. Aldrich stopped by a bench beneath a sprawling oak, the last traces of daylight filtering through the branches. He sat, patting the space beside him. Lyanna hesitated, then lowered herself down, the weight of the day finally settling into her bones. For a long moment neither spoke, just the soft symphony of night around them. Then Aldrich broke the silence. You know, he said, voice low, it's rare to find someone who sees the heartbeat beneath all the noise. Lyanna met his gaze, a flicker of vulnerability passing between them. Maybe that's why we keep fighting. He smiled, the kind of smile that didn't need words to promise solidarity. Together, in that quiet corner of the city, they let the night carry their unspoken resolve, a shared commitment to the change they knew was coming, step by step, heartbeat by heartbeat. The cool night air wrapped around them like a shield, holding space for the fragile calm that had settled between Aldrich and Lyanna. The city's distant hum was a gentle reminder of the world still turning, still waiting. Lyanna shifted on the bench, pulling her jacket tighter around her. "There's so much to do," she said quietly. "Sometimes I wonder if it's enough." Aldrich reached out, his hand brushing hers, tentative but steady. "It's never about doing enough all at once. It's about showing up again and again. That's what changes things." Her eyes softened, a flicker of hope lighting their depths. "Together?" "Together," he confirmed, his voice unwavering. For a moment they sat like that, hands lightly touching, two people leaning into the weight of the night and the promise of the dawn. Above them, the stars blinked awake, silent witnesses to the beginning of something neither dared to name, yet but both felt deep in their bones. A quiet revolution of heart and purpose, growing stronger with every breath. The first rays of dawn began to stretch across the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold. Aldrich stood, pulling his jacket tighter as the chill faded with the rising sun. He glanced down at Lyanna, who was watching the light spill over the cityscape with a calm determination. "We should head back," he said gently. "The day won't wait for us." She nodded, standing with him. Their steps fell in sync as they walked toward the elevator, the silence between them no longer heavy but charged, a quiet understanding passing like an unspoken vow. Back inside the office, the city was waking fully now. The hum of life was louder, but Aldrich and Lyanna moved through it with a steady purpose, ready to face the challenges ahead, knowing that change, like the dawn, comes slowly, but always, with light, ChatGPT said. As they reached the lobby, the automatic doors slid open to the bustle of the morning crowd, people rushing to their destinations, the clatter of footsteps mixing with distant car horns. Aldrich inhaled deeply, the air thick with possibility. Lyanna glanced at him, a faint smile playing on her lips. Ready to make them see? He met her gaze, steady and sure. Not just see, to listen, to act. Together they stepped out into the city's pulse, two quiet forces joined by conviction, ready to turn promises into progress, one deliberate, step at a time. The streets buzzed with life as Aldrich and Lyanna moved through the crowd, their footsteps in sync despite the chaos around them. Somewhere between the honking cars and distant chatter, a quiet resolve settled over them, a shared understanding that the road ahead was difficult, but worth every challenge. Lyanna pulled her coat tighter against the morning chill. "We'll need to lean on each other more than ever," she said, voice low but firm. Aldrich nodded, eyes scanning the horizon where the sun now cast golden light over the city's glass towers. "Together then, for the people who don't have a voice yet." A soft breeze swept past, carrying the faint scent of rain and possibility. And in that moment, the city didn't feel so heavy after all. Aldrich glanced over at Lyanna, the determination in her eyes mirroring his own. The weight of the campaign, the resistance from the board, the endless meetings, it all seemed smaller when faced together. "We'll make them listen," he said quietly, "not just with data, but with the stories behind those numbers." Lyanna smiled, a hint of tiredness softened by hope. "That's the heartbeat we've been searching for." As they walked into the rising sun, the city around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the change they were ready to fight for. As the main entrance of Quisario Corp loomed ahead, tall and imposing in its steel elegance, Lyanna's pace didn't falter. The glass panels reflected their silhouettes, not as two individuals, but as one force. She caught his reflection, beside hers, and squeezed his hand briefly, grounding him in the moment. Inside, the lobby buzzed with early morning activity. Assistants with clipboards, junior executives clutching coffee, whispers trailing behind like smoke. But when Aldrich and Lyanna walked in, heads turned, something about their presence commanded stillness. They entered the elevator, its polished mirrors capturing the sharp lines of Aldrich's suit and the quiet fire in Lyanna's eyes. "The board expects pushback," Aldrich said, adjusting his cufflink. "But they won't expect sincerity. Or us, united." Lyanna's lips curved, not into a smile, but something fiercer. "They'll try to dissect our proposal, break it down into numbers, risk sheets, and quarterly reports. Then we'll give them more than a proposal," he replied. "We'll give them purpose." The elevator chimed. The doors slid open to reveal the 57th floor, the boardroom's battlefield. Inside, 12 pairs of eyes turned to them, familiar faces hardened by profit margins and legacy power plays. At the far end, Aldrich's father, Magnus Quisario, sat unmoved, a king unwilling to surrender his throne. Aldrich's voice cut through the quiet. "We're not here to ask for permission." Lyanna stepped forward beside him, shoulders squared. "We're here to show you the future, and why it needs all of us." They placed the folders down, filled with data, yes, but also testimonies, photos, grassroots reports, projections rooted in ethical innovation and human need. For a beat, no one spoke. Then Magnus leaned back, steepling his fingers. "You want to dismantle a legacy built over 4 decades. Replace it with idealism dressed in spreadsheets." "No," Aldrich said calmly. "We want to redeem that legacy, and we're already late." Lyanna's eyes met Magnus's, unwavering. "This isn't just a campaign, it's a reckoning, and we're ready to lead it." A murmur rippled through the room, subtle but telling. Some board members leaned forward, others exchanged skeptical glances. Magnus remained silent, his expression unreadable. Derek Voss, the CFO, cleared his throat. "You're asking us to reroute millions into untested channels. Community-based, reinvestment, zero-waste protocols, grassroots alliances. These aren't traditional metrics of growth." "They're the future of growth," Lyanna replied firmly. "And every delay costs us more, not just in revenue, but in relevance, in reputation, in lives." A soft rustle as Camilla Tring, the youngest board member and daughter of a textile labor union leader, flipped through the proposal. She stopped at a page, a handwritten letter from a Floresian farmer who piloted their regenerative cotton initiative. Camilla looked up. This is different." "It's real," Aldrich said. "We've spent years building this quietly, community by community. We didn't come to theorize, we came with results." Still, the skepticism held like a cold front. Magnus finally rose from his seat. His presence, weathered and imposing, cast a long shadow. He paced slowly, eyes narrowing at Aldrich. "I built this empire on control, on predictability. You want to trade certainty for chaos, for sentiment." Aldrich stood tall, voice steady. "You built an empire. I'm trying to build a legacy, and legacy means nothing if it forgets the people it was built on." For the first time, something flickered in Magnus's eyes. Not approval, but the faintest trace of introspection. He turned to Lyanna. "You're the one behind these numbers?" Lyanna nodded. "And the stories." The suppliers who never got fair contracts. The families who lost clean water so the factories could meet quotas. The children who wrote us letters, begging us to change. She stepped closer. We're not erasing what you built. We're trying to make sure it's still standing 20 years from now, and worth something more than dividends. A silence followed. Dense, charged. Camilla broke it first. I vote yes. On the pilot. Let's bring the initiative to Floresia's textile sector fully. Let the numbers and the people speak together. One by one, reluctant nods followed, not consensus, but enough to tilt the balance. Magnus didn't vote. He didn't have to. He turned, hands behind his back, and stared out the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. Then quietly, "You have 1/4. Aldrich exhaled, a slow, measured breath. Lyanna's hand found his under the table, not to comfort, to anchor. "We only need 1, he said. The sun had dipped low by the time they returned to their office. The boardroom victory still clung to them, not loud or triumphant, but quiet and earned, like the calm after a storm that hadn't swept them away. Aldrich loosened his tie, his shoulders finally relaxing as he sank onto the edge of the couch. 1/4, he muttered, more to himself than to her. It's not enough time. Lyanna crossed the room to him, setting a mug of warm tea in his hands. Then we make time work for us. He looked up at her, the flicker of a smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. You're still not scared, are you? I'm exhausted, she said, settling beside him. But scared? No, not anymore. She rested her head lightly on his shoulder. He hesitated, then leaned into the contact just enough. The space between them, once sharp and cold with formality, now felt like a shared shelter. They doubted. You, he said after a beat. But you made them feel. You didn't just argue the numbers, you humanized them. Lyanna looked up at him. You gave me the space to do that. Aldrich turned, his gaze lingering on her. Something unspoken passed between them. Heavier than gratitude, softer than desire. The kind of connection forged through fire and stubborn hope. Do you ever regret it? He asked. Signing the contract with me. Being dragged into all this chaos. Lyanna didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for one of the letters from the Floresian farmers left on the desk. The ink smudged in places, the writing careful and heartfelt. I used to think I did, she admitted. But now, no, not if this is where it led. Aldrich swallowed. There were so many things he could say. That he didn't deserve her loyalty. That he still woke up afraid of turning into his father. That sometimes the only thing keeping him from walking away was her. But instead, he said the one thing that came out honest. I'm proud of you. She smiled, eyes warm despite the weariness. I'm proud of us. Outside, the city buzzed as night took over. But in that office, in that quiet moment, there was only the stillness of two people who had fought, bled, and stood, and who, somehow, were still choosing to stand together. Floresia, 3 weeks later, the air smelled of sun-warmed earth and drying cotton. Children's laughter echoed in the distance, and the low hum of conversation drifted from nearby stalls. It wasn't the world of boardrooms and market projections. It was real, breathing, and alive with the rhythm of those who had waited too long to be heard. Aldrich stepped out of the car, squinting into the brightness. Lyanna was already a few paces ahead, crouched low as she spoke, with a group of women in faded work shirts and wide-brimmed hats, their hands still dusted with the morning's harvest. They didn't speak in PowerPoint slides or quarterly targets. They spoke with calloused palms and steady eyes, and Lyanna listened like their words were gospel. Behind them A little girl peeked out from the shade of a vendor's awning, a notebook clutched in her hands, oversized sunglasses slipping down. Her nose, Lyanna. 6 years old, impossibly observant, and already scribbling down everything she saw. Aldrich glanced back at the car. "You can come out, sunshine. It's safe." Lyanna slid out, her tiny shoes crunching the gravel. "You said there would be goats." "There are goats," he said solemnly. "They're probably unionized by now." She giggled, then ran toward Sienna, who scooped her up mid-laugh, dusting her cheeks with kisses. The women around them smiled knowingly. One of the elder farmers approached Aldrich. "You're the CEO," she said in quiet Spanish. "The one who used to sign our silence." He met her gaze without flinching. "I was," she studied him. "And now?" "Now I'm here to listen. And to make sure my daughter never has to ask me why I didn't," she nodded. "Then come. You'll want to see the field that survived the drought. It's not just the seeds, it's the hands." They walked, the path lined with recycled irrigation barrels and new planting patterns already taking root. Sienna fell into step beside Aldrich. "They've started teaching regenerative methods in the school here. 2 of the farmers volunteered as instructors." His lips curled upward. "You're rewriting the system." "No," she said softly. "We are." He glanced over at Lyanna, now trailing behind a baby goat with open delight. "Do you think she'll remember this?" Sienna took his hand, the ached cotton fields stretching wide before them. "She won't need to. This is the kind of memory that becomes legacy." Aldrich said nothing, only squeezed her hand tighter. And in that quiet valley of resilience, beneath the weight of sun, soil, and second chances, the Quisario name began to mean something different. Not control, not conquest, but care. 10 years later, University of Candea, Floresia. The lecture hall buzzed with energy. Not the nervous kind before exams, but the charged hum of something brewing. Students filled the tiered rows, laptops open, notebooks scrawled with ideas and protest slogans. At the center of it all stood a tall young woman, poised yet unpretentious, dark curls pulled into a loose knot, her voice steady at the mic. Change doesn't trickle down. It rises from the roots, from the ground, from the ones who've lived closest to the damage. Lyanna Leono Quisario's words held the weight of someone who had walked the fields, listened to the farmers, and read every dusty, faded letter her mother had preserved in an old lacquered box. Behind her the projector flashed images, photos, of the Floresian Pilot Initiative, a timeline of the shift from exploitative textile practices to full regenerative models. Charts, yes, but also faces, names, smiles, struggle. "We are no longer asking the boardroom for permission," Lyanna continued. "We're building a model outside of it. A student-run cooperative that connects campus textile labs with village farming guilds. Zero waste, fully traceable, powered by mutual benefit, not profit margins." Cheers broke out, fingers snapped. A few fists raised in solidarity. From the back row, Aldrich and Sienna watched quietly. He looked older now, distinguished, calmer, his suit traded for a simple linen shirt. Her hand rested lightly on his knee, anchoring him as always. "She sounds like you," Aldrich whispered. Sienna smiled. "She isn't me, she's better. Braver. She never had to fight to be heard in our home. She just knew we'd listen." Lyanna paused, scanning the room. "This initiative is called Races, Roots, because that's what we're returning to. Not just in farming, but in values, in dignity, in truth." She clicked the final slide, a side-by-side photo, her at age 6 chasing goats in Floresia, and her now standing with the same farmers, notebooks in hand. "Join us," she said, voice bright with fire. "Not because it's easy, but because it's right." The room erupted, not in polite applause, but in movement. Students rising to their feet, signing up, arguing over logistics and partnerships, even before the meeting officially ended. Backstage, Lyanna slipped behind the curtain to find her parents waiting. "You made it," she grinned, eyes dancing. "We wouldn't miss it," Sienna said, pulling her in for a hug. "You were incredible." Aldrich nodded, pride lighting his face. If the boardroom saw this version of you, they'd vote yes out of fear. Lyanna laughed. "Good. Maybe they should." Then she sobered slightly, eyes flickering between them. "Everything I'm doing, it's because of what you two started, what you refused to compromise." Sienna cupped her daughter's cheek. "We just cleared the road, baby. You're the one building the future." Outside, the sun dipped low over the Floresian horizon. But instead of fading, the sky glowed orange and gold, like fire finding its form. And the Quisario legacy, once forged in steel and power, now bloomed quietly in fields, in classrooms, in the hearts of those who dared to dream aloud and act. 17 years after the initiative, Floresia Summit Pavilion. The sea was calm that morning. Waves lapped gently against the shore as dignitaries, activists, and global business leaders gathered beneath white canopies trimmed with indigenous embroidery. Lush greenery framed the pavilion. Not ornamental, but cultivated, part of a living system nurtured through years of patient stewardship. At the center of the stage stood Lyanna Leono Quisario, now 30, draped in a deep green dress woven from Floresian regenerated fibers. She no longer read from notes. Her presence filled the space effortlessly, a blend of purpose, heritage, and fierce clarity. "Today," she said, her voice rippling across the sea breeze, "we announced the first global accord between grassroots, cooperatives, and regenerative supply chains, no longer brokered by institutions alone, but co-authored by the communities who have been silenced the longest." Applause rose, not thunderous, but reverent, as if the world itself understood the weight of the moment. From the front row, Aldrich and Sienna sat side by side. His hair had turned mostly silver, his posture relaxed but attentive. Her eyes shimmered with pride, hands clasped neatly in her lap. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. After the ceremony, Lyanna walked toward them through a sea of reporters and well-wishers, waving off the cameras for a moment of quiet. "You saw the vote pass?" she asked, eyes wide with disbelief. "We felt it pass," Aldrich said, pulling her into a tight embrace. Sienna smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Do you remember that letter you wrote at 6, the one you slipped into our meeting binder?" Lyanna blinked, then laughed softly. "The one where I asked if goats could be part of the campaign. You said, 'Let the grown-ups listen to the ground. It speaks better than any spreadsheet,'" Sienna quoted. "You were already leading us then," Aldrich added. "We just had to catch up." The three of them stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun dip behind the Floresian mountains. All around them, children played near compost gardens. Elders taught visiting scholars how to plant by the lunar calendar. A boardroom in the capital now sat quiet, its power quietly transferred here, into the soil, the people, the hands that had waited too long. Lyanna looked out over the gathering. "It's strange, isn't it? You tried to change a company. I tried to change a system. But what we really did was choose to love where we came from." Sienna leaned her head on Aldrich's shoulder. He took her hand, weathered and warm. "And that," she whispered, "changed everything." As twilight settled over Floresia, the stars appeared, not overhead, but around them in lanterns lit by solar power, in the eyes of the farmers, the students, the next generation already stirring. And so the story of Floresiana ended where it began, not in power but in promise, not in conquest but in care, not with an empire but with roots. Floresia, 25 years after the first seed, the valley had changed, and yet it hadn't. Where once parched fields cracked under, forgotten policies, now acres of rich, dark soil breathed life. Wild flowers bordered irrigation canals. Wind turbines turned lazily against the horizon. Local children ran barefoot past community greenhouses, their laughter chasing birds into the trees. A small glass-walled research center overlooked the valley, built where Aldrich Quisario once stood, uncertain of whether legacy could ever mean more than power. Now it bore a bronze plaque etched with 4 simple words: "The future grows here." Inside, Lyanna Leono Quisario, now a global ambassador for regenerative equity, sat barefoot on the floor of a sun-drenched atrium. Around her a group of 12-year-olds, some from Floresia, some from across the world, gathered for the first day of the People's School for Living Economies. She held up a small handful of soil. "This," she said, "is the memory of the land. It remembers what we take and what we give. It remembers who came to hurt it and who stayed to heal." One boy raised his hand. "Is it true your mom used to argue with CEOs?" Lyanna grinned. "She didn't argue. She taught them to listen. And your dad, he used to be scary, right?" That made her laugh aloud. "Terrifying, but only until he learned that strength doesn't mean silence, it means service." Outside the atrium window, Aldrich and Siana walked slowly along a path flanked by jacaranda, trees, now towering with lavender blossoms. He moved with a cane, her arm looped gently through his. The empire he once feared losing had become something quieter, more beautiful, a living thing he had no desire to control. They passed an open-air mural painted decades ago by local artists, a family planting seeds beneath a sun shaped like a child's drawing. Above it, the words read, "From soil we rise." Siana paused, brushing her fingers over the faded paint. "You ever think we'd make it here?" Aldrich asked, his voice soft with age. She looked at him, her constant, her storm, her soft place. "To land. I didn't think we'd survive the beginning," she said with a laugh. "But you changed. We changed. That's the story." "No," he said gently, gazing toward the school. "She's the story now." Lyanna's voice echoed, faintly from inside. "Someday you'll be the ones teaching this, not because you inherited it, but because you belong to it." And as the children circled around her, hands in the soil, sun on their backs, a wind swept gently across the valley. The story of Floresiana did not end with a signature or a sale, or even a summit. It ended and began again in the hands of those who knew. The most radical act of leadership is planting something you may never live to harvest. Later that evening, under a canopy of string lights woven between jacaranda branches, the Quisario family gathered with elders, youth leaders, and farmers. It wasn't a gala. It wasn't a conference. It was simply a meal, locally harvested, quietly prepared, passed by hand. Lyanna sat cross-legged on a woven mat, her tablet discarded, hair tousled from the day. Around her, a dozen languages mixed and swirled: Spanish, Yoruba, Tagalog, Quechua, Arabic, voices laughing over roasted corn and guava pastries, stories traded like heirlooms. She looked across the gathering at her mother, who was cradling a newborn in her lap, not hers but the baby of one of Lyanna's first mentees. Siana cooed and rocked softly, sunlight dancing in the lines of her face. Nearby, Aldrich leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, breathing in the smells and sounds he never thought he would live long enough to understand as peace. When Lyanna rose to speak, she didn't stand on a podium. She simply walked barefoot to the center of the circle, her voice soft but sure. I used to think legacy was a building or a title, something carved in glass or steel. She paused, letting the dusk settle around them. But my mother taught me that legacy lives in names. Names we remember, names we protect, names we say out loud even when the world forgets them. She looked down at her hands, scarred a little from fieldwork, inked with lines from her journals, still calloused from protest signs and seed gathering. And my father, she continued, voice thickening with affection, taught me that even the most powerful man can kneel, to ask for forgiveness, to plant something gentle, to love something he once tried to control. A hush fell over the gathering. Aldrich opened his eyes, caught her gaze, and nodded. She smiled, and then, as if sensing the moment was never truly hers alone, she stepped aside. A teenage girl stood up beside her, brown-skinned, braids down, her back, a small sunflower pinned behind one ear. "I want to say something too," the girl said shyly. "We're the next ones, and we're not afraid." Applause rose, not orchestrated, not dramatic, just true. Lyanna placed her hand on the girl's shoulder. "Then take it," she whispered. "Take the mic, take the plan, take the land and love it better than we ever did." Behind them, the school bell rang once, not to end the night, but to begin the next shift. In the seed lab, in the moonlight garden, in the open-air library where volunteers translated ancestral farming manuals into dozens of tongues. And just beyond the canopy, a small bronze statue gleamed under starlight. It was of a young girl with a notebook in one hand and a sprouting plant in the other. The plaque read simply, "She listened, she remembered, she grew, in honor of the Floresian daughters." Aldrich reached over and took Lyanna's hand, weathered and strong. "We did it," he whispered. "No," she murmured, watching their daughter laugh with students in the firelight. "She is doing it," and the wind, gentle and fragrant with jacaranda and soil, carried their legacy forward, into hands uncalloused by greed, into hearts unafraid of softness, into futures still, unnamed, still forming. The world would not remember Floresiana for its factories. It would remember it for its fields, for the girl with the notebook, for the roots that never stopped reaching. After the rain Floresia, 3 springs. Later it had rained all night, soft, slow rain, the kind that doesn't wash things away, but wakes them up. By morning, the valley shimmered. Dewdrops clung to the leaves of moringa trees. Wild beasts stirred from under bark. The once scarred land, now quilted with terraces of indigo, turmeric, and cotton, pulsed with quiet aliveness. Lyanna knelt beside a new planting row, sleeves rolled, fingernails full of earth. Around her, children ran barefoot between rows, some humming, some digging, one carrying a very uncooperative duck. She smiled as she pressed her palm gently to the soil, the same way her mother had once taught her to press her hand to her own chest when her heart felt full. "Still breathing," she whispered. From a distance, Lyanna approached slowly, a thick scarf wrapped over her head, age graceful in her every line. She carried a small thermos of salabat and a folded newspaper that read, "Floresian Model Adopted at ASEAN Summit, the Quisario Framework for Regenerative Diplomacy." She didn't show it to Lyanna. Some legacies speak louder in the silence. "Ixti." "Saved you some ginger tea," Lyanna said gently, passing it over. "Thanks, Ma," Lyanna murmured. "Want to see the seedling logs?" Lyanna sat beside her daughter on the edge of a stone bed. "No," she said softly. "I just wanted to sit." And so they did. A while later, the door to the distant veranda creaked, and Aldrich stepped out, walking slow, steady, cane in hand, wrapped in a threadbare shawl Lyanna had woven for him long ago. He watched them for a moment, the two, women who had broken him and rebuilt him in ways no merger ever could. He didn't speak, just raised his hand once, the morning sun spilling across his weathered knuckles. Lyanna raised hers back. Sienna leaned her head on her daughter's shoulder, and in that moment, there was nothing left to fight, or win or prove. Just a field, a sky, and 3 lives stitched together, not by blood alone, but by choice, by soil, by seasons, by everything that grows again. After the rain, Floresiana's story has gently closed with that last tender moment under the jacarandas, the rain-washed earth, and the quiet promise of new growth. If you want, I can help you craft any additional scenes, character reflections, or spin-off ideas. Or we could build a full formal compilation with chapter summaries, character bios, and thematic notes to accompany your manuscript. And though her footsteps no longer pressed into the village paths, Floresiana lingered in the perfume of the ache. Gardenias she once tended, in the lilt of songs she taught the children, in the hush of wind weaving through jacaranda boughs. Her presence, like the mist after rain, refused to vanish entirely. Some say the earth grew softer where she once knelt, whispering stories into seeds. Others claimed that in the blue twilight, if one stood very still, a voice might rise from the silence, not loud but sure, humming lullabies of resilience, love, and beginnings stitched from sorrow. But stories are like seeds too. They grow. If tended, if you'd like, we can nurture those unwritten branches. A scene where an elder tells Floresiana's tale to a young girl who bears her name. A reflection from another character, perhaps Adela, the quiet neighbor, or Raphael, the skeptical traveler, showing how Floresiana changed them. A spin-off tracing the journey of a letter Floresiana once wrote, found years later in a hollowed book inspiring someone far away. Or we can shape a companion volume, chapter summaries to guide new readers through her journey, character bios with layered insight into each heart in her orbit, thematic notes on healing, memory, and regeneration, like rain on scorched soil, years passed as they always do, seasons folded over themselves like linen sheets, worn, familiar, softened with memory. The village changed. The plaza tiles were relaid, the school's bell replaced, but beneath it all, Floresiana's spirit remained braided into the quiet pulse of the place. On the anniversary of the rains, the jacarandas always bloomed a little brighter. Children ran beneath their lavender snowfall, catching petals in their palms, and sometimes, without knowing why, they would pause and press the blossoms to their chests. Elders spoke of her rarely, not from grief, but reverence. She was never mythologized, never turned into something distant or saintly. She remained real, the woman who once wept openly during planting season, who could laugh so hard she startled birds, who believed that every ending was simply a root, waiting to reach downward again. In the back room of the old house she once kept, a journal remained. Bound in worn leather, softened by age, it held more than memories. It carried instructions, not on how to live like her, but how to live fully. She wrote of listening to the wind, as one would an old friend, of tending to things others deemed broken, of asking questions that had no answers, but were still worth holding in the dark. Now her story doesn't end. It echoes. If you'd like, we can now build a formal epilogue wrapping up the narrative threads in the voice of another character, perhaps someone Floresiana mentored. A journal entry from Floresiana herself, a final one, written just before that scene under the jacarandas. A years later chapter, following the impact of her life through the next generation. A guidebook-style appendix compiling all of Floresiana's wisdom, rituals, and remembered sayings. There came a spring when a girl, no longer a child, not quite grown, found the journal. She hadn't been looking for anything in particular. Dusting shelves, tracing her fingers along the seams of old books and unspoken histories, she pulled the leather-bound notebook free as if it had called to her. Inside, sketches of seeds and sleeping roots, lists of herbs for sorrow and sleep, fragments of lullabies written in 2 languages, and margins filled with questions. What is something worth staying for? How do you love what does not love you? Back. Is silence always emptiness, or can it be a seedbed too? The girl did not know Floresiana, not truly. She had only ever heard her name in passing, softly, like one might speak of a garden that blooms long after its gardener is gone. Yet the words in the journal felt alive, as if they were written just for her, as if someone long ago had made space in the world for her arrival. She began to copy passages into her own notebook. She began to speak the questions aloud beneath the same jacarandas, now older and gnarled. She began to write answers, not as declarations, but as offerings. Yes, some silences are sacred. Maybe what we tend is what teaches us how to stay. Sometimes the loving is enough, even if the soil never returns the bloom. And just like that, Floresiana's voice returned, not in echo, but in evolution. Not one life, but many. Not one ending, but roots branching into a quiet forest of continuance. This girl's name was Lyanna. No one remembered who had named her that, only that it suited her. She was wiry and curious, like the vine that clings to stone walls and manages somehow to flower in the thinnest cracks. She lived with her great-aunt in a weather-worn house on the outskirts of the village, just where the path turned to wild grass and birdsong. After discovering the journal, Lyanna changed, not all at once, but in the quiet ways people often overlook. She listened more. She started saving seeds from every fruit she ate. She traced constellations with her finger on the window glass before bed, and each week she copied another page of Floresiana's writing into her own hand, as though she were trying to learn a language that had almost been forgotten. One evening, while the sky bled soft lavender and gold, Lyanna returned to the jacaranda, grove alone. The journal rested in her satchel, its pages fluttering with notes and loose flower petals pressed between lines. She knelt by the base of the oldest tree, its roots curled like sleeping animals, its bark patched with lichen and memory. There, with fingers shaking but heart still, she dug, not deep, just enough to place a folded letter she had written herself. On the outside, she had scrawled, "For whoever comes next." Inside, not answers, but more questions. What do you carry that once belonged to someone you've never met? What does the earth remember when we forget? If healing is not loud, how do we know it's working? She covered the letter with care and whispered a simple word Floresiana had written once in a fading hand: grow. And the wind, soft through the trees, answered as if it had been waiting. Lyanna began returning to the grove each week, not always to write or to bury more letters, but to sit, to listen, to wait. She brought offerings: dried orange peel, bits of ribbon, poems scrawled on scraps of fabric, all left beneath the jacaranda trees like tiny prayers stitched from her days. The journal was always with her now, its pages growing, fuller, interspersed with her own handwriting, a conversation unfolding across time. Then one morning, the rains came again. Not the harsh, pounding kind, but a slow, silver mist that hung in the air and made the village glow. Lyanna walked barefoot to the grove, mud squelching between her toes, hair plastered to her cheeks, heart wide open. There on the stone bench beneath the largest tree lay something new, a sprig of blooming rosemary wrapped in twine. No note, no footprints, just the herb, and the certainty that she was no longer the only one listening. That night she wrote in her own notebook for the first time, without copying anything from Floresiana's pages. Her words were uneven, unsure, but hers. Today I learned that someone is always watching, not with eyes, but with memory. Today I felt like a bridge between the ones who came before and the ones who will come after. I am not Floresiana, but I think maybe I am the seed she left behind. The next morning she returned to the grove again. This time, she brought with her a small tin box filled with blank paper, pencils, and a tiny slip of cloth embroidered with the word "Continue." She placed the box at the base of the tree, and she waited, not for an answer, but for the next voice. We can now grow this narrative into a new story cycle. Here are a few directions we could explore next. The Grove Letters, a series of epistolary entries between Lyanna and an unknown writer who begins answering her questions with their own. Roots and Threads, chapters from Villages Touched, by Floresiana and now changed by Lyanna, showing how legacy becomes communal. The Legacy Journal, interwoven entries by both Floresiana and Lyanna, combining wisdom and wonder across time. A New Bloom, a full second novel arc in which Lyanna must face a decision or threat to the grove, testing what she's truly learned. Weeks passed. Lyanna no longer felt alone when she walked to the grove. Though she rarely saw anyone else, the signs were unmistakable. A ribbon tied in the crook of a branch, a smooth stone carved with a spiral, a folded paper boat left floating in a puddle beneath the jacarandas. The box she left was no longer hers. It had become theirs, shared by unseen hands that came quietly, respectfully, leaving messages and offerings in turn. Some wrote questions. Did she ever doubt? What does forgiveness look like in soil? Others left fragments of their own lives, a drawing of a mother's hands, a song written in trembling script, a small braid of hair bound in red thread. Lyanna answered what she could, not with authority, but with presence. She didn't pretend to be Floresiana, but she had learned what Floresiana knew, that listening is a kind of tending, that silence, when shared, becomes a sacred space. And then came the day someone signed a note. For Lyanna, with gratitude, she stared at it for a long time. It was the first time someone had spoken to her, and not just into the mystery. And with that single note, something shifted. The story was no longer just about carrying Floresiana's voice forward. It was about becoming one herself, a voice, a question, a keeper of quiet and seed and sky. One evening, under a moon that hung like a polished coin above the grove, Lyanna gathered all the letters and offerings and journal pages scattered across seasons. She wrapped them in muslin and tied them with twine. Then she dug a deep hollow beneath the tree, further than before. This time, she planted the bundle like a seed. She whispered, "This is what we've grown." And then rising, she spoke her first true prayer, not to Floresiana, not to the earth, not even to the grove, but to the one who would come after her. "I don't know your name yet, but I've made space for you. When you arrive, listen. The wind carries everything you need." Years passed. The grove endured, through floods, through summers that cracked the earth, through the slow erasure of the old village boundaries. But always, something remained. The box beneath the jacaranda, the occasional footprint left in damp, soil The letters nestled in roots and moss. No one claimed to own the space anymore. It had outgrown ownership. It had become a threshold. And then one dusky morning a child arrived. Her name was Soul. She came with a small backpack, her hair in uneven braids, her shoes scuffed from travel. She wasn't from the village, not really. Her parents had moved to the region to find quieter lives, having heard rumors of a place where the air smelled of rosemary and rain and time itself. Soul found the grove on her second day there, drawn by a story told in passing by a neighbor. They say if you write a letter to the trees, someone might answer you, maybe even yourself. She didn't fully understand what that meant, but she followed the path anyway. She paused at the first petal-flecked clearing, stood before the great tree with the scarred trunk and the high branches whispering in the wind. There, half buried in ivy and ash leaf, was the tin box, rusted, yes, but whole. She opened it. Inside were papers softened by time, a small drawing of a bird in flight, a button shaped like a heart, and a note tied with red thread. She untied it. The handwriting was faded but strong. I've made space for you. When you arrive, listen. The wind carries everything you need. El Sol smiled. She didn't know who El was, not yet. But in the stillness, she felt it. A quiet thrum, like a heartbeat in the soil. She sat cross-legged beneath the tree, pulled a notebook from her pack, and began to write. Not for school, not because anyone asked, but because the silence had become hers now. Her first words were simple. Dear Wind, I think I've been waiting for you too. And so the story loops, not in a circle, but in a spiral, ever widening. Floresiana's hands are long gone from the world. But her voice? It lives in groves and girls and soft, unanswered letters that somehow always find a reader. The promise was never permanence. The promise was continuance. Soul returned every day after that first letter. She never told her parents exactly where she went, only that she was drawing trees or walking the long way home. And in a way, it was true. She did draw and she did walk, but more than that she listened, the way Lyanna once had, the way Floresiana had before her. At first she wrote questions. Can a tree be your friend? What if you don't remember anything but still feel like you've lost something? Does wind ever get tired of moving? She tucked each question into the box beneath the tree. She didn't expect answers, but they came anyway. Not in ink, not in notes, but in moments. A blackbird landing just as she finished a poem. The scent of lemons in the air with no fruit trees nearby. A feather spiraling to earth and landing on her page without sound. Soul began to write differently after that, not for answers, but as gifts, as if her words themselves were offerings to the air, to the roots, to the girl named Lyanna and the woman before her whom she only knew as a whisper, Floresiana. Then one day, beneath a thick layer of fallen leaves, Soul found something, buried in a shallow earthen hollow, a bundle wrapped in muslin, soft and spotted with age. She untied it slowly. Inside, a journal. The first page bore a line that stopped her breath. To the one who comes after me, this is what we've grown. Soul did not know yet what it meant, but her fingers trembled as she turned the page. She read until the sun dipped low and shadows lengthened like reaching hands. And that night, for the first time, she dreamed. She stood in the grove, but it was glowing with light. Around her were women, blurred at the edges, their eyes kind and weathered. One was planting something, one was singing softly, one was writing with her fingertip in the dust. None of them spoke aloud, but Soul understood. They were not ghosts, they were seeds. She woke at dawn and ran barefoot to the grove. She brought with her a spool of golden thread, a handful of sunflower seeds, and the beginnings of a new letter. To whoever comes next, the trees are still listening. I think we're part of something bigger. I think we always were. She folded the note and placed it with the others, gently, reverently. She smiled. Because now, Sol understood what Floresia meant. Not all stories are meant to end. Some are meant to root, and some, like wind and bloom and quiet kindness, are meant to go on forever. Weeks melted into months. The grove, always still and generous, had become Sol's second skin. She knew the sound of each bird call at different hours, the shape of the shadows at twilight, the precise feel of the earth just before rain. But something was shifting, not in the trees, but within her. She had started writing not just letters, but responses to questions asked long ago, to wonderings she'd never known were waiting for her. One day she read a page from Lyanna's journal that ended, "What does the earth remember when we forget?" Sol sat for a long time with that question open on her lap. Then she answered. Not out loud, not even on paper at first, but with a quiet offering. She untied the string from her own wrist and hung it on the branch above the box. The next time she came back, the string was gone, and a sprig of blooming thyme sat in its place. It was enough. One afternoon, as golden light poured between the trees like honey, Sol felt a tug, not physical but unmistakable, drawing her toward a patch of overgrowth she had never explored. She parted the reeds, stepping carefully through nettles and thorn brush until she found something unexpected, a stone, flat, moss-covered, nestled in ivy. It bore no name, no inscription, only a hand-carved spiral. She brushed it clean, sat beside it, and felt an overwhelming urge to speak, not to the trees, not to the wind, but to them. Floresia, Lyanna, I don't know if I'm doing this right. I only know that when I'm here, I feel whole, like I've stepped into a memory I never had but always missed, like your stories weren't just stories, they were invitations. And then she whispered something even softer. If this place is sacred, am I sacred too? The wind didn't answer in words, but it danced. It wrapped around her. And in that moment Sol understood. The grove didn't require certainty. It only asked for presence. She began to dream differently after that. Sometimes of future girls walking paths she hadn't yet walked. Sometimes of Lyanna, older now, sitting beside her in silence. And once, just once, of Floresia herself. Not as a ghost, not as a figure from a story, but as a woman, tired, strong, laughing as she braided rosemary into her own hair, whispering, "Everything we plant, even in sorrow, will bloom in someone else's joy." Sol woke with tears on her cheeks and her palms dirty with soil. It was time, she decided, to begin her own journal, not in response to Lyanna's or Floresia's, but as a third thread, a new spiral. She titled the first page, "The Grove, as I Know It," and beneath that she wrote, "This is not the beginning, but it is the beginning of my part, and maybe that's enough. The Grove as I Know It, Journal Entry 1, Sol, early spring. Today I watched a beetle crawl across the bark of the jacaranda tree. I thought about how it knows where it's going without asking permission. It just is. Small, alive, necessary. I think I'd like to live like that. Someone left a folded paper bird in the offering box. No note. Just a blue crane with wings that looked like they remembered flight. I didn't take it, but I sat beside it and whispered, "Me too." Journal Entry 2, 2 days later. I think the wind carries more than weather. Today I heard it say, "Keep going." It might have been my imagination. But what if imagination is just another kind of memory? One we're born with instead of given? Journal entry 3, after a storm. There's a tree in the farthest corner of the grove that's split down the middle. Lightning, maybe, or time. But it still blooms. It still leans toward the light. I think that's what Floresia meant by healing. Not becoming what you were, but blooming anyway. Soul sentries began to pile up like petals, soft, deliberate, quietly profound. Some were no longer about the grove itself, but about what the grove awakened in her. Thoughts about her parents, who still didn't understand, her silences. Dreams of planting something real, maybe an herb spiral or a garden for moths. She wasn't writing to Floresia anymore, or even to Lyanna. She was writing to the one who would come next, someone she couldn't yet imagine, but trusted was already on their way. Journal entry 11, mid-spring. The world is too loud sometimes, but the grove always speaks in the right volume. It says things like, you are allowed to be slow. Roots take time. You don't have to bloom for anyone but yourself. Today I believed it. One evening, she left behind her journal. Not in the offering box, but hidden in the hollow of the split tree, wrapped in a scarf that smelled faintly of rosemary and thyme. She tied a note to the outside. For the fourth, voice. When you're ready. And walked home under a sky full of stars that felt like they were watching over her. The grove was older now. Not ancient, not wild, just weathered, wiser. Jacaranda blossoms still fell like snow each spring. The offering box, though rusted and moss-wrapped, still held scraps of lives tucked gently inside. Drawings, letters, tiny stitched poems. And somewhere in the hollow of the lightning-split tree, Soul's journal waited. It had waited a long time, then came the fourth. They arrived without a name, at least not one the grove recognized yet. A child of no specific origin, neither seeking silence nor running from noise, just wandering, drawn the way Soul once was, the way Lyanna had been, the way Floresia first knew the dirt by its story and not just its scent. They were 12, or maybe 13, wore an old canvas jacket with patches sewn by hand, carried a camera with no film, and instead of writing letters, they carried questions in their pockets, literal ones scribbled on torn scraps and crumpled napkins. They'd been collecting them for years. The first question they took out and read aloud beneath the grove was simple. What makes a place sacred? They didn't expect an answer. But the wind picked up. They smiled, sat down, pulled out another scrap. Can we belong to something without owning it? A blossom drifted down, landed on their knee. They looked up and whispered, thought so. In the hollow of the tree, they found Soul's journal. It wasn't hidden, just waiting, like it knew who was next. The scarf smelled faintly of thyme and ash. The journal cover was soft, worn. The note on the outside read, for the fourth voice, when you're ready. They opened it, began to read. Felt something begin to settle in their chest, something warm and old and alive. First journal entry, the fourth voice. I didn't know I was looking for this. But now that I've found it, I don't want to leave. Not just the grove, not just the stories, but this line of listening. It's like being caught in a song you didn't know the words to, but your body remembers the rhythm. Floresia, Lyanna, Soul. Now, me. I'm not ready to write advice, or truth, or anything wise, but I think maybe the grove doesn't need that. Maybe it just needs someone willing to keep writing, so I will. I'll write not because I know, but because I don't. And just like that, the spiral continued. The fourth voice didn't sign their entries, just left marks in the margins. A pressed clover, a charcoal drawing, a bit of red thread. Their questions never stopped, but they stopped needing answers. And when They one day left a journal in the roots of a younger sapling. It bore only one message on its cover: keep going. There's a mushroom ring on the north side of the grove. I sat in the middle of it today. It felt like being inside a thought that the earth had been thinking for a long, long time. I didn't touch anything, didn't take a photo, just listened. Is it possible for silence to say, "You're welcome here"? Because I heard that journal entry, day 30, someone's drawn symbols on the back of the old offering box. I traced them with my thumb, a spiral, a line through a heart, a bird, the bird again. I see it everywhere, carved into bark, scratched into stones, drawn in ash on the inside cover of Soul's journal. What does it mean? Flight, return, message, or maybe just this? Notice, journal entry, day 45, after rain. It smells like moss and old stories, like someone cracked the spine of time and left it open in the middle. I read Lyanna's old note today, the one where she asks, "What does the earth remember when we forget?" Here's my answer, Lyanna. Everything. It remembers our footsteps, the things we buried and meant to come back for, the love we didn't know how to name. It remembers and keeps it safe until we're ready again. Journal entry. Day 52, today I added something to the grove, a tiny cairn of stones in the southern hollow, each one with a symbol. For air, for earth, for fire, for water, for the watching eye. I didn't leave a note. Just let them sit. Maybe one day, someone will find them and feel what I meant. Not everything needs to be explained. Some things are offerings, not messages. Journal entry, day 60, last of the season. The jacaranda is shedding early this year, blossoms falling like stories that know how they end. I think I'm ready to leave something behind, not leave the ache. Grove, just offer a piece of myself to stay, even when I go. Tomorrow I'll write my last entry in this journal. Then I'll start another. One meant for whoever comes next. The fifth, the unexpected one. The one who doesn't even know the grove is waiting for them. Yet the fifth voice. Arrival, she didn't mean to find the grove. She was following her younger brother's lost kite, bright red and torn, caught in the upper limbs of the wind. The path veered off the main road. She ducked under a low branch, stumbled over a stone, and, just like that, stepped into the clearing. Stopped. Stared. It wasn't the trees, though they were tall and flowering. It wasn't the box, though she noticed it, half sunk in ivy and story. It was the feeling, like the grove had been waiting, like it recognized her. She didn't know yet what it was. Didn't know about Floresia or Lyanna. Had never heard Soul's name. Had no idea a journal, barely visible in a split tree, had her story already unfolding inside it. But she sat down, cross-legged, quiet, hands pressed to the ground like it might speak, and then she said aloud, "Okay, I'm listening." First, entry, the fifth voice, written on the back of a flyer in dull pencil. I don't know what this place is. I don't even know why I sat down, but it feels like the kind of place you whisper in, even when you're alone. My brother lost his kite, but maybe I found something else. I'll come back. She did, each day for a week, then a month, then the whole summer. She found the journals, read them in quiet order. Floresia's steady roots, Lyanna's soft ache, Soul's wonder, the fourth's wild questions. She felt like she knew them, like they were waiting, not just for someone, but for her. She began to write, not every day, not even every week, but when the sky felt too heavy, or when joy was too bright not to share. Later entry, written in bright ink, corners smudged with berry juice. Soul said, not all stories are meant to end. I think some aren't even stories, they're paths, or braids, or echoes. I don't think I'm supposed to tell my story here. I think I'm supposed to listen to the ones already blooming, but even listening leaves a mark. On the final day of autumn, she tucked a photo into the box, black and white, her hand reaching out, touching the jacaranda trunk. No words, just the image. She tied a green ribbon to the lowest branch and whispered, "For whoever comes next, it's okay to arrive before you understand why." And so the grove continued. No endings, only offerings, only arrivals, only the sacred soft act of leaving something behind, not to be remembered, but to be found. Would you like to continue with the Fifth Voices Journal, explore her story more deeply, or now begin gathering and structuring the full compilation into a literary artifact, a book of intertwined voices, generational memory, and botanical metaphor? It could be titled, "The Grove Remembers Letters Beneath the Jacaranda," a spiral of listening, what the earth keeps. Please subscribe my channel for more videos, please.